Welcome to GEOG485 585L, Internet Mapping. Module 2.2, Web-Based Mapping Clients, the Google Maps API. Part 2, Related Topics. This week we will be discussing some additional Google Maps API capabilities that can enhance the quality and flexibility for bringing content into your maps, and also go through an additional demonstration in what might be considered more of a real-world type web page, more so than the web pages that we had in our demonstrations last week. In addition to the lecture material here, we also have some embedded videos produced by Google that highlight and demonstrate some of the technologies that we're going to be talking about in this week's lecture. And those will become apparent when we encounter them during the slide deck here. So first off, one capability that is of great interest in being able to further customize your Google map is the ability to apply styles to the default maps that you can bring into Google Maps. This video produced by Google is a short demonstration of how to use the Styled Maps wizard produced by Google and linked at the bottom of the slide to create a style and then copy the generated JavaScript object notation, or JSON, into a block of JavaScript that you're using in your web page to apply those styles to a map object that you're creating. This is a sample style selector screen that I've created for the area around Albuquerque, where I have already created a number of styles with the ultimate goal to highlight the interstate highways and the points of interest, suppressing the display of other place names or other information that I don't want to emphasize in this particular map. In this case, we can see the settings for each style by clicking on the map style list on the right, where here, if I click on style 0, this is where I've modified the style for water. And if we click on a color here, we can see the change in the color of water in the display. I'm going to change that back to blue in terms of modifying the hue. You can see if I choose style 1 for the highways, I've set those to red, as you can see in the screen here. Again, I could choose a different color for the highways, but for this style, I prefer red. I've chosen a simplified view of the arterial roads here in style 2, where the simplified radio button is selected. And you can see that those roads do not have visible boundaries or other features, where if I turn the visibility to on, you have additional naming and small edges associated with the roads, or I could turn them off completely. In this case, I prefer the simplified version. Local roads I have turned off, as you see here in style 3. If I were to have them turned on, you would see them in the background, but in this case they tend to clutter the map up some, so I'm going to have the local roads turned off. Administrative areas are currently in a simplified mode. That basically controls the display of the labels and some of the other features, since I have all selected here. And this, again, tends to strip out some of the content from my map. If I choose on, you'll see that we now have place names located on the map. I could choose simplified, which would make the names disappear, but the geometries would remain there. But in this case, I'm just turning the administrative areas off. Style 5 relates to points of interest. And this is one of the features of the landscape that I would like to emphasize. So I have made them a more contrasting color to the background. In this case, I've made them a shade of cyan. I could otherwise make them red, have them stand out a little bit more, or purple perhaps. But I happen to like cyan as a nice shade. Now you can't really tell in this particular view, but with the points of interest turned on, as we zoom in, you actually start to then see the names of the points of interest as the scale is appropriate for those. So you can see here we have these points of interest that are various parks that are now showing their names associated with the cyan footprints of them. If I come in here and zoom in a little bit more, we can then see Graves Park here. And finally, I also set points of interest to on in terms of their visibility. So if I wanted to, I could actually generate a static map for the area that I'm viewing right now based upon this style. But in this case, we're wanting to take the style that I've just defined here based on all of these elements and use it to inform a custom Google map that we're developing. To do that, I click on this Show JSON button here, and this shows me the corresponding JavaScript code that I can copy and paste into my Google Maps API JavaScript to assign this set of styles to the map object that I'm creating. Here you have a demonstration of our initial very simple map from our demonstration last week, in which the styles defined through the previously demonstrated styling process have been applied to that simple map. And if we view this in a new window, we can see the styled map as I've generated it. And if we view page source, we can scroll down to the block of text where we have our initialize function, and we have our map object options as we've previously created it for our other demonstrations. But you can see that we now have this styles element that represents the JSON object that I copied out of the style editor provided by Google. And this is the only modification that I needed to make to that previously demonstrated block of HTML and JavaScript to have the default map modified to display the style that I defined. So another capability that is very useful for streamlining the addition of content into a Google map is Google's AdFusionTables system, which is now a standard option within the Google Docs area. Here we have a video that was produced at Google I/O 2011 last spring that discusses managing and visualizing geospatial data with AdFusionTables. In particular, there are a number of sections of this video that would be of specific interest in this class, though there are other aspects of it that are covered within the video. First is the first 10.5 minutes or so when the concepts of AdFusionTables are introduced. At about minute 21, where there is a discussion of the integration of AdFusionTables into the Google Maps API, allowing you to reference data that are embedded within AdFusionTables into your custom Google Maps that you are developing. And then a very brief listing of some links at the end of the video that you might also find useful. So if you don't have time to view the whole video as shown in the previous slide, you can click on the links here to go to just the particular sections that are of greatest relevance to what we're doing. Finally, I have a demonstration of a more complete web page that brings together many of the concepts that we've been discussing last week and this week. And this is a sample web page that I'm still in the process of actually developing for myself, and I still have some content to add to the body of it, but all of the structure has been defined, as is the map interface. So now I'll open this up in a new window so we can see what the page looks like. So in this case, I have a heading and part of the page in terms of some content up above. And then I have a set of links down below or sections down below where I will ultimately insert additional information about each of the marathon events that I've done. In the meantime, I've written code for each of the events that will allow us to click on a map for each event, and the map zooms to the area around that event, and we can go then to the map and zoom in and see the footprints or paths of the various events that I've done within that area. If I click on this Animas Valley Steamworks Half Marathon, here we can see the path outside Durango. And if I click on this, it will show the route in San Diego for the Rock and Roll Marathon. So let's take a look behind the scenes at the source for this page and talk about some of the characteristics of this as it better reflects what you might think about in terms of the structure and approach for a more operational Google Maps page. So if we do View Page Source, the first thing that you will notice as we are looking at the contents of this page is that I have a simplified header area here where I have a simple doc type HTML declaration at the top. This is because this page is actually being developed in HTML5, which, as you've been reading through the HTML manual of style, you've been seeing some examples of. With that, we have a simplified HTML opening element that is slightly different from the XHTML element that you've been using for your code. You'll also notice that I have, instead of including the style sheet or style information directly in the header and the scripts in the header, I have included links to external style sheets and scripts. So here, I have a link to a style sheet that is stored outside of the page that actually has my styles defined in it. And if I open this in a new tab, we can see this is the set of styles that I have defined for this particular page, including a style that defines the background color and font for the body and everything contained with it, the attributes of the div that I'm going to be putting the map into, styles for the H1 and H2 elements in terms of the font sizes and other characteristics of those, and a style for the anchor for the links to external resources, and two styles associated to classes that I create in my document, one called date and the other called time, and we'll see those in just a moment as we look at the source for the web page. So this is all of the styles that I defined for the page, but you can see how much more easily managed they are in a separate file that is included by reference. Going back to the link here, you can see that the link, and then here we're defining what the link is using this rel statement. This is a style sheet. We're pointing to the external style sheet In this case, this is defining a location relative to the current page. That's what the / is. In a folder called styles, and then a file named base.css. This media element here allows me to actually define separate styles for different display types or processes. So I could potentially have a separate style sheet that is defined for, say, printing, so that if somebody is printing the page, if their browser supports this capability, the page could actually be styled differently than if it's being viewed on screen. You can see here that we have included the standard link to the Google Maps API, which is always required when we're doing a Google Maps client. And then we have an external JavaScript file that I've created that has all of the core functionality in terms of the interactive components of the page, creating the map object, and various other sort of utility settings for the page. So if I open this page, what I have done is I've created a set of global variables that I can refer to by name. So I've here defined a variable that correlates with the geographic center of the US. I've created a global variable that I can then reuse later, but since it is defined outside of my initialize function, that name and its content will remain consistent throughout the page. And I'm defining a map type variable where I can set up, outside of the rest of the functions, a constant for the roadmap style that I want to use for the map. That way I can use this map type variable as a shorthand for this longer map type. And also I can change the map type just by working with this code at the very top of my list of JavaScript, as opposed to digging down deep into the initialize function itself. This is something that just contributes to the maintainability of the JavaScript that we're writing. If we scroll down to this area that I've added a comment identifying that it's for functions, we can then look at this initialize function, which should be familiar to you after our work of the past week, where we're defining the map center as that previously defined US center variable up above. Here we're defining an array of map styles. This is a direct copy of another JSON object that has been copied out of the Google style builder. And I'm now assigning that array to a variable called map styles that I will later use when I'm creating my map options. Here I have my map options, where I am creating all the settings for my custom map, including the zoom at a level of 4, which gives me all of North America, that is centered at the map center location, which, as we noted above, is the geographic center of the US. So the map should be centered, or the US lower 48 should be essentially centered within our map. We're setting our map type ID to that constant that we set up above. That's the road map type. These are some options where I'm actually modifying the controls. So here you can see I've got the map type control of false. That's actually disabling the control that would normally be presented to users where they can choose the map type. In this case, I want them to only use the road map type. Here I'm enabling or setting to true the scale control, so there will be a scale included in the map that's displayed. Here I am setting the street view control to false to suppress the display of the street view. I'm setting the pan control to false as well. so that that circular map panning button that normally appears in the upper left-hand corner will also not be displayed. And here I'm setting some options for the zoom control so that it will show the small style of zoom control instead of the default large. And here I'm specifying the styles through reference to the variable up above that I assigned that array of map styles to that I had created previously. So this way I have a nice compact and readable representation of my map options that in some cases includes references to other variables that I've created up above, essentially compartmentalizing some of the settings for the page into variables that I can more easily manage. Once I've set those options, I can then create my new map object, where in this case, since I have created the global map variable up above, remember up here, I can actually refer to that variable by name instead of creating it anew when we basically create our new map object. That's why there is no var command in front of this map variable name, because it has previously been created, and here I am just referring to that previously created variable by name. This is different from our previous examples where we were creating the map variable anew at the time when we initialize the map object. So in this case, it's our standard new Google Maps map object where we are specifying the element in the structure of the page that we want to link the map object to, and the name of the variable that contains all the options for creating the map object. You'll see here that as a part of this initialize function, I also have two other functions that I've created. One called build markers and one called AdFusionTable. This is another way of compartmentalizing my code so that I can have the activities that build a set of markers for the map and add the fusion table as separate blocks of code that I can work with and manage more easily than having them all embedded directly within the initialize function. So let's take a look at these two functions right now, starting with build markers. That is this function that I've created right here, where I've added a comment before the function that reminds me what I am using the function for. And you can see that this is just like that initialize function, but with a different name. So it's build markers with, in this case, a pair of empty parentheses. And then the curly brackets denoting the beginning and end of this function. I have a comment here that notes that I first am wanting to clear out any previously created markers by setting a variable called myMarkers to an empty array. So that's what this does. And then I've actually, in this case, set it up so that I have a set of places that I have created on the master HTML page that I'm going to loop through. And I'll show that to you in just a minute, but let's look at this function first. What I'm doing here is I have a list of locations called event places right here. And what I'm doing is just looping through that and executing the same block of code for every one of them. This is a little bit more complex than what you're probably going to be doing, but I just want you to see here that at the end, all we're doing is the same thing we did for each individual marker that I demonstrated last week, where we're creating a new marker specifying a position. In this case, this is a position called point, and the title, that's a variable called name. And we're assigning those to the position and title elements for the marker. and then we're taking that marker and doing a set map function and adding it to the map. So if we look back at our source, you can see that I have this variable that I've created in a block of JavaScript that is within the HTML, where I have created a variable called event places that consists of an array of these name value pairs, where there's a name of Albuquerque, for example, and a point that is a lat long Google lat long point. And I have a list of these. And this is what I've been processing to create all the different map points. The reason I included this block of JavaScript here instead of in the external file is this allows me to actually have this information within the HTML page separate from the JavaScript, so I could have a different page that would use the same external JavaScript code but might have a different set of values for event places. So this is a way to have content that is specific to the page separate from the content that is generic to the page. If we look back at the JavaScript, we can now see the entire function results in the construction of a set of markers that correspond to each of the items in that list in the HTML page. Now let's look at the second function, the AdFusionTable function here, where we start the function again with just giving it a name. And since we're not passing it any parameters to modify its behavior, we're just going to have an empty pair of parentheses. And here we're using the syntax for linking to a Fusion Tables layer, as is documented in the Google Maps API documentation, where we're creating, in this case, a variable called event routes that is a new Fusion Tables layer, where we are specifying at the bare minimum information required, which is a query element that has two values. A selector, a select statement that provides the name of the variable in the Fusion table that contains the location information, and a from statement that includes the numeric identifier of the Fusion table that we want to use to provide the data for those routes. And then we just use the setMap function on that event routes variable that is a Fusion Tables layer. We use the setMap function and supply to it the name of the map object that we want to display that Fusion table in. And that's the way we can add a Fusion table to this particular map. So again, as we look here, we can see that we have our map that shows the custom styling, where in this case I suppressed the display of state names, but the state boundaries still appear. The markers that I've defined for each of the 6 geographic areas where these events have taken place. If we then zoom in on one of these markers, we can see the route of the events that took place in that area, where the styles associated with those maps are defined in the Fusion table. And since I didn't specify otherwise, I can actually click on the route and it will automatically bring up an info box that has the attributes of the Fusion table that I created that contains the information for the routes. The videos and the documentation provide a lot more detailed information about how to create Fusion tables and embed them in your Google Maps document. But this is a page that illustrates the whole process of creating the structure, as we saw here, where we have essentially this head area with the links to external files, whether they're style sheets or JavaScript files, and then the body, which includes the initialize function and the onload, that basically defines the set of H1, H2, and paragraph objects that define the content of the page. And as I add content, I will basically just be filling out the information in each of these paragraph classes. So that ends our lecture for this week. Hopefully this will provide you with some additional approaches to enhancing the Google Maps that you're developing, and give you some additional ideas about how you might be able to use Fusion tables or other methods to customize the content in your maps, or be able to more effectively manage the data that go into your maps. Thank you.